Our story begins on Christmas Eve. John McClane, a gritty New York City cop, arrives in Los Angeles to reconcile with his estranged wife, Holly. She's moved out west for a high-powered career at the Nakatomi Corporation, even going by her maiden name, Gennaro. John is picked up by a charismatic limo driver named Argo and taken to the Nakatomi Plaza, a shimmering 40-story skyscraper. While the office Christmas party is in full swing on the 30th floor, John heads to a private executive bathroom to freshen up. On the advice of a fellow passenger, he takes off his shoes and socks to make fists with his toes to beat jet lag. It's a choice that will define the rest of his night. Suddenly, the festive atmosphere is shattered. A group of heavily armed terrorists, led by the sophisticated and cold-blooded Hans Gruber, storms the building. They seal the exits, cut the phone lines, and take the partygoers hostage. Hans isn't actually interested in political revolution. He's an exceptional thief, after $640 million in untraceable bearer bonds locked in the building's high-tech vault. When the company president, Mr. Takagi, refuses to give up the vault code, Hans executes him in cold blood. John, still barefoot and armed only with his service pistol, witnesses the murder from the shadows. He realizes he's the only hope for the hostages. John begins a game of cat and mouse. He manages to kill one of the henchmen, Tony, and sends his body down the elevator wearing a Santa hat with the iconic message, "Now I have a machine gun. Ho ho ho." He also secures a two-way radio, allowing him to listen in on Hans's team. McClane manages to alert the LAPD by pulling a fire alarm, but the terrorists convince the responding officer it was a false alarm. In a desperate move, John throws a body onto the officer's car as he's driving away. This officer is Sergeant Al Powell. Finally, the police realize something is wrong. They surround the building, but they are hopelessly outgunned. As the LAPD and FBI take over the scene, they prove largely ineffective. Deputy Chief Dwayne T. Robinson is more worried about procedure than lives, and the FBI agents, the two Johnsons, are eager to use military-grade force, which is exactly what Hans wants. Inside, things get personal. A sleazy executive named Harry Ellis tries to negotiate with Hans by offering up McClane. When John refuses to surrender, Hans kills Ellis while John listens helplessly over the radio. Later, John runs into Hans himself, who is inspecting the roof explosives. Hans pretends to be an escaped hostage named Bill Clay. John plays along, but eventually gives Hans a gun to protect himself. When Hans tries to shoot John, he realizes the gun is empty. John knew who he was all along. However, the rest of Gruber's team arrives, and John is forced to escape across a floor of shattered glass, severely cutting his bare feet. The FBI cuts the building's power, which, ironically, is the final step Hans needed to open the vault. With the bonds in hand, Hans plans to blow up the roof, killing the hostages and the FBI to fake his own death. John, bleeding and exhausted, makes it to the roof. He drives the hostages back downstairs just as the FBI helicopters arrive. Hans detonates the roof, destroying the helicopters and the top of the building. John survives by tying a fire hose around his waist and jumping off the side of the skyscraper, crashing through a window several floors down. In the chaos, Hans discovers Holly is John's wife thanks to a news report by an intrusive journalist, Richard Thornburg. He takes Holly to the vault room as his final leverage. John enters the vault room with only 2 bullets left. He tapes his pistol to his back with Christmas tape and pretends to surrender, laughing with Hans. As Hans prepares to kill him, John pulls the hidden gun, shooting Hans in the chest and the last henchman in the head. Hans stumbles backward through a shattered window, grabbing Holly's arm and nearly pulling her with him. John unfastens Holly's expensive watch, the only thing Hans is clinging to, and Hans falls 30 stories to his death. John and Holly emerge from the building, finally reunited. John meets Al Powell in person for the first time. The night has one last scare when the dead henchman Carl emerges from the wreckage with a rifle, but Al Powell, haunted by a past shooting, draws his weapon and takes him down, finding his courage again. Argyle, the limo driver, bursts out of the garage, having knocked out the terrorist's getaway driver, and whisks John and Holly away. As "Let It Snow" plays, paper, bearer bonds, falls from the sky like snow over Los Angeles. And that's Die Hard, the greatest Christmas story ever told.